Just a nurse. That's what Dr. Mercer had whispered to the resident 2 weeks ago, watching Hannah move through the ICU with the kind of economy of motion that suggested she'd done this 10,000 times before. Just a nurse. No Ivy League credentials. No pedigree. No letters after her name that mattered in a place like this. Seattle General in Denver had its hierarchy, and Hannah Clarke occupied the bottom rung of it, or so he believed, so everyone believed. They didn't know. Not yet. Not about the Special Forces insignia locked in a safe deposit box across town, or the way her hands could move with surgical precision when the moment demanded it, or the folded flag from Bagram tucked behind the vent grate in her locker like a prayer no one was meant to find. The ICU smelled of antiseptic and floor wax and something metallic underneath, the smell of controlled crisis, of bodies fighting to stay alive under fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency just below the threshold of conscious awareness. Hannah moved through the ward at 5 in the morning, before the chaos of the day's shift, before the attending physicians and the residents and the administrator rounds. Her footsteps made no sound on the white tile. She'd learned a long time ago that silence was the first skill in any high-stakes environment. Keep your head down. Keep your movements minimal. Don't draw attention. Don't remind anyone that you exist. She charted vitals in room 304, the numbers flowing from her pen with penmanship so precise it looked almost military, because it was, though no one here would recognize that fact. 7 hours of sleep in the last 2 days. That was information. Room 306, the elderly man with the post-op infection climbing again, his white count at 14,800. She made a note. Attending needed to know. Room 308, the pediatric case, O2 saturation stable at 94%. She allowed herself half a second of satisfaction at that one. That kid was going to make it. And then room 312. Dr. Mercer appeared in the doorway of room 312 just as Hannah was finishing her assessment. The timing was never accidental with him. She'd noticed the pattern, the way he positioned himself to catch her in moments of competence, as if bearing witness to her skill was something that caused him physical pain. The patient in 312 had been admitted the night before with a dislocated shoulder, pre-op for reduction under anesthesia, but the family had arrived early, frantic. The man was in agony. His wife was crying. His 2 adult children stood helpless against the wall. Hannah had assessed the situation in under 6 seconds. The shoulder joint wasn't impacted badly enough to justify letting a family watch their father suffer through an extra 2 hours of waiting. The patient was medically stable. The positioning was straightforward. She had the knowledge. She had the hands. She had done this in field conditions under fire with nothing but a first aid kit and the taste of copper and dust in her mouth. "I can help with the pain," she said to the family, her voice pitched low and steady. "If you're comfortable with that." The wife nodded immediately. The daughter gripped her mother's hand. Hannah washed her hands at the sink, 90 seconds, surgical standard, and returned with supplies. She'd already injected the local anesthetic, the lidocaine taking hold in the tissue. She positioned the patient's arm at the correct angle, her fingers finding the anatomical landmarks with the kind of certainty that comes from having done something correctly 1,000 times. The shoulder was a ball and socket joint. Physics governed what came next. She moved. Just moved. Smooth. Controlled. Her left hand cupped the humeral head while her right hand guided the arm into external rotation, and then internal, and then the socket received the ball back into place with a soft click that only trained ears would recognize as the exact sound of success. The man gasped. Not in pain. In relief. Sinus rhythm, Hannah said quietly, checking his vitals on the monitor. Heart rate dropping already, blood pressure stabilizing. "You're fine now. Just rest." The daughter was crying again, but this time it was gratitude. The wife reached out and squeezed Hannah's hand with both of hers, and Hannah allowed it for 3 seconds before gently extracting herself. That's when she felt the weight of observation from the doorway. Dr. Mercer stood motionless, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscle jumped beneath his skin. He was tall, 6'2", with the kind of tailored suit that announced his position louder than any title badge. His eyes tracked every motion Hannah made as she documented the reduction with precise clinical language, anterior dislocation, successfully repositioned via external rotation manipulation. No neurovascular compromise. O2 sat stable. Pain resolved. Awaiting orthopedic clearance. His presence had changed the temperature of the room. She could feel it, the way the air felt different when a predator enters a space it considers its territory. "That's quite a bedside manner," he said. His voice was smooth, cultured, laced with something that only registered as menacing if you knew how to listen for it. He didn't look at the family. He looked at Hannah. Though I'd note that shoulder reductions are typically performed by physicians. In an OR. With anesthesia. And proper protocols. Hannah continued writing without pausing. Her penmanship remained steady. Her hand did not tremor. Patient was stable. Family was present. Pain management was indicated. Protocols were followed. He turned to the family, his expression shifting into something warmer, something that looked almost like concern. "I apologize for my colleague's enthusiasm. She means well, but sometimes nurses can overstep their scope of practice. We'll have orthopedics evaluate him properly when they arrive." He didn't wait for a response. He just left, the air in the room relaxing fractionally as his presence withdrew. The wife looked at Hannah with something between gratitude and apology in her eyes. Hannah gave her a small nod and excused herself to chart the rest of the floor. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came at lunch, at 1247 hours, when Hannah took her break in the break room on the 3rd floor. She'd brought the same thing she always brought, a sandwich she'd made that morning, a thermos of black coffee, an apple. She sat at the corner table, the one that gave her sight lines to both doors, an old habit that had nothing to do with the hospital and everything to do with survival. The table had 4 other nurses at it. 2 residents. 1 attending who'd wandered in looking for decent coffee and found disappointment instead. When Hannah sat down, every person at that table rose and left. No eye contact. No acknowledgement. They just evacuated. The attending followed 30 seconds later, suddenly remembering something important he needed to do elsewhere. She ate her sandwich alone. The coffee was still hot. The apple was red and smooth under her thumb when she rolled it across the table, a small circle of motion to keep her hands occupied. Her knuckles whitened around the fork, there for a second, then gone, but her face remained expressionless. Pain was information. Isolation was information. The fact that Dr. Mercer had already poisoned the well against her, had made her radioactive to the staff through whispers and innuendo, was exactly the kind of information that mattered. She did not react. She simply finished her meal, cleaned up after herself, and returned to the ICU 30 minutes early, because sitting in that break room a second longer would have been a choice she'd made, and Hannah Clarke did not make emotional choices. Room 8 had been marked for ICU admission at 0930 hours. Trauma incoming. Paratrooper. Injury report indicated a chest wound from a climbing accident, a fall that had resulted in penetrating trauma to the left thorax. The patient had been stabilized in the ER and moved to their ward at 11:35. Hannah's hand stilled when she saw him. The name on the chart was different. Jackson. Matthew Jackson. But his forearm bore the tattoo she recognized immediately, black ink, block letters forming a call sign she hadn't heard anyone speak in 6 years. Valkyrie. Not her real name. Her battlefield name. The name the team had given her when she'd walked into a firefight and walked back out with a casualty slung across her shoulders and a promise she'd made to God or fate or the universe, "You get him back alive, and I'll never leave anyone behind again." He was asleep. Morphine drip at 4 milligrams per hour. His face was thinner than she remembered, the weight of life after war, the weight of survival, and there was a blankness in his expression even in sleep. She recognized that blankness. It was the look of someone who'd crossed a line they'd never been able to cross back. She checked his vitals. Heart rate elevated but steady. Respiratory rate 16, slightly high but acceptable given the trauma. Oxygen saturation 96% on 2 liters nasal cannula. The surgical repair had held. His body was doing what bodies do, healing, fighting, persisting. She was about to move to the next room when his eyes opened. For a moment, just a moment, there was something in his expression that might have been recognition. The eyes tracked her face. The muscles around his mouth twitched. But then the morphine reasserted itself, and the light behind his eyes dimmed, and he looked at her the way he looked at the cardiac monitor and the forestand and the blood pressure cuff, as a piece of equipment in a hospital room. Just another nurse checking on him. She pulled the chart back toward her and finished the notation. His fingers moved slightly on the sheet, as if reaching for something just out of reach, but he didn't speak. She didn't expect him to. That night, before her shift ended, Hannah stood at her locker in the staff break room and pulled at the vent grate. The folded flag was still there, tucked behind the plastic slats in a way that no one had ever noticed because no one ever looked. The flag was from an honor guard ceremony 6 years ago in Arlington. It had been handed to her with a ceremony and a salute, and she had accepted it the way you accept the weight of your own mortality, solemnly, briefly, and with full awareness that this moment was the moment everything had changed. She ran her thumb across the fabric. It was still crisp, still perfectly folded into that tight triangular package. She'd never opened it. Never would. The flag was the marker. The boundary between the person she'd been and the person she was now. A slight tremor ran through her left hand. The kind that came from muscle memory, from the recollection of carrying another human being's weight for 3 miles through terrain that wanted to kill them both. The kind that came from knowing that despite everything, despite her training, despite her skill, despite the fact that she would have done anything to change the outcome, she hadn't been able to save everyone. She closed the locker quietly and returned to the ICU floor. The paratrooper was still asleep in room 8, his breathing steady, his morphine drip keeping him in that place between life and the absence of it. Hannah pulled a chair over to the monitor and Saturday. Just for 5 minutes. Just to confirm that his body knew how to keep going, that the chest rising and falling wasn't a courtesy or a pause but an actual decision his lungs were making minute after minute. The fluorescent light above hummed its mechanical lullaby. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. Outside, Denver had moved into evening, the sun dropping behind the mountains, the sky turning the color of old bruises. She sat in the darkness of room 8 and did what she'd been trained to do in the worst circumstances imaginable. She waited. She watched. She lived with the weight of it. And tomorrow, she would return and do it all again. She lived with the weight of it. And tomorrow, she would return and do it all again. But tomorrow arrived with the screaming before she finished her first cup of coffee. Room 312, 3rd floor, 7:43 a.m. A paratrooper's wife stood beside the bed gripping the metal rail while their daughter pressed her face against the window, afraid to look. The patient's shoulder had dislocated during a transfer, his arm hung at an angle that made the wife's voice climb higher with each breath. Please. Please, someone help him. Hannah entered with her kit, already knowing what needed doing. 12 years and 3 tours meant she had done this in field tents under mortar fire, in helicopter bays with rotor wash hammering the windows, in supply rooms lit only by flashlight while someone screamed. A dislocated shoulder in a climate-controlled hospital room with a waiting orthopedic surgeon was mercy by comparison. She guided the wife's hand away from the rail. I need you to breathe with me. In through your nose. Hold it. Out. The woman obeyed. Hannah turned to the patient, her voice dropping to the register that came from somewhere deep in her chest, the one that made people listen without knowing why. I'm going to reduce this. You're going to trust me. She moved his arm into external rotation. The family watched her hands move with a kind of precise efficiency that belonged to surgeons, not nurses. 10 seconds. 15. The pop of the shoulder socket settling back into place made the daughter flinch, but the pain in the patient's face crumbled into relief. That sinus rhythm for your shoulder, Hannah said quietly. You're going to be fine. The wife began to cry. The daughter pressed her lips together and nodded once, the way people do when they've just watched something impossible happen and they're trying to decide if it was real. That's when the door slammed open hard enough to rattle the glass panel. Dr. Mercer stood in the threshold like something that had wandered in from a storm. His face had already begun its redden, the kind of burn that started in the jaw and climbed toward the hairline. His voice when it came had an edge like a blade scraping tile. "Nurse Clarke. Step away from that patient immediately." Hannah released the arm smoothly and stepped back, still facing the family. She didn't turn toward Mercer. That would have been an invitation. "You are practicing medicine without a license." His voice carried down the corridor the way voices do when they're meant to be heard. "Which violates Hospital Protocol 7.2.1, State Nursing Law, and basic professional standards. I need you to understand the severity of that." The wife's hand found Hannah's wrist. "She just saved him. I'm going to have to ask you to let the medical professionals handle this patient going forward." Mercer stepped sideways, positioning himself between Hannah and the family. His presence was like bad weather moving in, pressure dropping, atmosphere thickening. What just happened here was dangerous. Illegal. A nurse cannot perform orthopedic reductions without physician supervision. Hannah turned to the vital signs monitor, found the patient's chart on the computer, and began documenting the reduction with the exact time, the exact angle, the patient's exact response. Her handwriting didn't waver. Her jaw muscles didn't flicker. She typed as though Mercer was still in the hallway outside, calling to someone else, speaking into air that didn't contain her. Mercer waited for contrition that wouldn't come. For an apology, a flinch, the small collapse of a nurse caught overstepping. Instead, Hannah finished her note, hit save, and looked directly at him with the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. Her eyes held his for 2 seconds. 3. 4. Long enough for him to understand that she had heard every word and chosen not to acknowledge it. She turned back to the patient. "I'll check on you in 2 hours. If the pain increases, page me immediately." Mercer left, but the climate in the room had changed. The wife was staring at her daughter. The daughter was staring at Hannah. Something had shifted in that moment, not vindication, not yet, but the seed of a question that would grow in the space between what they'd witnessed and what they'd been told. The damage, though, was already blooming. By lunch, G.I. Jane had entered the hospital lexicon. Hannah heard it in the break room when she passed. Someone had said it just loudly enough for her to catch the syllables. In the staff meeting that afternoon, Mercer used it directly. "Our G.I. Jane seems to think she knows better than actual physicians." He said it with a smile, the kind of smile that told jokes at someone else's expense. 3 residents laughed. 2 looked at their feet. Hannah sat in the 3rd row of folding chairs and took notes on the quarterly protocol updates with the same precision she applied to everything. Her hand didn't shake. Her pen didn't waver. She was there. She was listening. She was already gone. The whispers started that night on the unit board. Mercer had posted a formal write-up, highlighted in yellow, positioned where every staff member must see it when they clocked in. Repeated instances of scope of practice overstepping. Patient safety concern. Documentation requiring review. But the real damage was what he said after the formal write-up. In hallways. In the charting room. To residents and attendings and the nursing supervisor who already had 3 previous complaints on file. "I'm not saying she falsifies notes," he said, which meant he was saying exactly that. "I'm just saying the documentation doesn't always match what other people saw. And there have been medication discrepancies on her shifts." He let the implications hang there, dense as fog, while people leaned in because accusations were currency in a hospital and he was distributing them freely. By Wednesday, the medication comment had become a fact. By Thursday, falsifying patient notes had joined it. By Friday, Hannah walked into the break room at 2 p.m. with a precisely sectioned Tupperware container, grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, brown rice, measured into thirds, and watched as 5 staff members rose wordlessly and left with their trays in hand. Nobody said goodbye. Nobody said anything at all. She sat alone at the table, the fluorescent lights humming their electric prayer above her head. The lights had a frequency that could drive you insane if you let them, a sound like insects trapped in glass. Hannah didn't let much drive her insane anymore. She ate her chicken. She ate her vegetables. She felt the fork handle grow warm in her grip and watched her own knuckles turn bone white as her hand tightened without her permission. Her face stayed still. That was the thing about training, about real training, not HR seminars or hospital orientation. You could watch your hands betray you, your body's response to danger and isolation and the slow accumulation of disrespect, and you could choose not to acknowledge it. You could eat your lunch. You could swallow. You could exist in your chair as though nothing was happening. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. The isolation accelerated after that. When she offered to assist with a central line placement on Friday afternoon, the resident, a woman named Chen who had been kind to her for 6 months, looked at her with apology already written on her face. Dr. Mercer says we shouldn't let you near procedures anymore. He's concerned about documentation of your involvement. Hannah nodded once and stepped back. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She simply moved away from the bedside and watched Chen and another nurse complete the line together while the patient winced and the machines beat their steady rhythm. In the parking garage after shift, she sat in her car for 11 minutes before starting the engine, staring at nothing, her hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel like she was back in a vehicle she'd already been trained to drive. By the following Monday, the state nursing board had received formal documentation. Mercer had spent his weekend photographing and printing, creating a paper trail that looked airtight. He handed her a stack of forms at the start of shift, each page highlighted in yellow, each violation color-coded for emphasis. This pattern is going to be hard to defend, he said, not unkindly. Which meant he was absolutely certain it was indefensible. The board will see what I see. A nurse operating beyond her scope, creating documentation discrepancies, a safety risk. It's my professional obligation to report it. She accepted the papers without comment. 3 copies. Protocol violations listed in chronological order. The shoulder reduction. A medication administration he claimed was outside her authority. An assessment she documented that he claimed proved she was practicing medicine. Each item isolated, each item damaging when detached from context, each item exactly how he wanted it to look. She couldn't defend herself. Not without blowing her cover. Not without explaining that the logistics contractor in the cardiac unit, the one Mercer had no reason to know about, was suspected of selling intelligence to foreign operatives, and that her entire reason for being at Seattle General was to monitor him, photograph his meetings, document his network. Not without explaining the encrypted uploads to her handler every evening. Not without explaining the dress uniform in her closet or the Special Forces insignia locked in a safe deposit box or the folded flag tucked in her locker, the one from her teammate who didn't make it home from Bagram. JSOC had put her here for 6 months on a mission that was closing. The contractor's discharge was scheduled for tomorrow. Her window was shutting. Every accusation Mercer filed brought her closer to suspension, and suspension meant she couldn't work the floor, couldn't monitor the final phase, couldn't complete the operation. So she nodded, accepted the papers, and thanked him for his concern about patient safety. That evening, she photographed the logistics contractor meeting with an unknown visitor in the parking structure, 2 minutes of conversation, money changing hands, a phone number exchanged. She uploaded the encrypted files to her handler while sitting in her car, engine off, rain hammering the windshield like applause. The contractor's discharge was tomorrow at 0900 hours. Her mission window was hours. She drove home to an empty apartment where tactical gear sat in a locked closet beside her dress uniform. The uniform hung like a ghost of someone she used to be, someone who had commanded respect, someone whose presence made air pressure change. Now she was just a nurse being systematically dismantled by a man who didn't know she was already operating on classified orders from JSOC. She sat on the floor of her apartment with the folded flag in her lap, the one from Bagram, the one from her teammate who didn't make it, and ran her thumb over the triangle's edge. The fabric was soft from being touched 1,000 times, from being held during the kind of grief that doesn't have words. The fluorescent lights of the apartment hummed their steady prayer, the same frequency as the break room, the same sound that could drive you insane if you let it. She didn't let it. She sat there in the dark with the flag and the knowledge that in less than 12 hours, someone would call about the contractor, and the operation would either succeed or fail, and nothing Dr. Mercer had documented would matter because she would either be extracted or she would be exposed. Either way, her time at Seattle General was ending. Either way, by this time tomorrow, everything would change. The paratrooper's chest went rigid at 14:24. Hannah was running a routine vitals check in ICU room 8 when his breathing changed, not shallow, but absent on the left side. She placed her hand on his ribs and felt it immediately, no rise and fall, just tension underneath. His trachea had shifted right. The monitors began their climb, oxygen sat dropping from 94 to 88 to 82. Heart rate spiking. She'd seen this before. Outside Bagram, in the back of a Humvee with no time and no choice. Tension pneumothorax. A first-year resident named Chen stood in the doorway with a phone halfway to his ear, eyes wide and useless. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical rhythm above them. Hannah moved without speaking, her hand steady as a surgical laser, crossing the room in 2 steps to the crash cart. Her fingers found the 14-gauge needle on pure muscle memory, the same muscle memory that had kept 17 soldiers breathing in a combat zone where hospitals were 40 miles away and time moved like molasses through a firefight. "I need you to step back," she said to Chen. Not a request. A command. She didn't wait for him to move. She found the second rib, traced the midclavicular line with her fingertip, felt the anatomy beneath the skin like reading Braille. Sterile field. Needle angled 45 degrees. One smooth motion. The needle went in. And then, the hiss. That unmistakable rush of air escaping from a collapsed space, pressure finally releasing, the sound of survival. The paratrooper gasped. Color flooded back into his face like sunrise. Oxygen sat climbed, 85, 91, 94, steady. Heart rate dropping from 142 toward normal. Sinus rhythm. Chest tube kit, Hannah said. Her voice was flat, clinical. Now. I'll need a size 32 French suction setup and 2 units of O-negative standing by. Chen finally moved, phone pressed to his ear, stammering to respiratory therapy about equipment. Hannah's hands never stopped working. She'd just saved this man's life for the second time. 3 miles through hostile territory near Bagram. And now, in an ICU in Denver, in a hospital where no one knew who she was or what she'd done or why she could perform an invasive surgical procedure with the same calm efficiency a surgeon would use to tie his shoes. She had 7 minutes before Dr. Mercer arrived. He came through the unit doors at 14:54 with a sound of authority, not footsteps, but the deliberate click of dress shoes on polished tile, the kind of sound a man makes when he knows the room will part for him. He brought 2 hospital administrators with him. And security. The chest tube was already placed, already draining, already saving the paratrooper's life for the second time in as many hours. The procedure had taken exactly 12 minutes. By every medical standard, it was a textbook intervention. By every institutional standard, it was a crime. "Nurse Clarke," Mercer said. His voice carried the confidence of a man holding printed documents, each one a weapon. "We need to speak with you. Now." He had screenshots. Time-stamped. Highlighted in yellow like disease markers on an X-ray. Room 8. 1419, needle decompression. Procedure performed by unlicensed personnel. Violation of Hospital Protocol 7.2.4. Scope of practice violation. Dangerous independent action. The words moved through the documentation like bullets finding their mark. The patient was in acute respiratory distress, Hannah said. Her hands were already being washed, skin still damp. She met his eyes without blinking. Tension pneumothorax. Tracheal deviation. Hypoxia progressing. The needle decompression was indicated. That decision belongs to the attending physician, one of the administrators said. Female. Nervous. Her name tag read direct to Paulson. Not to nursing staff. The attending physician wasn't present, Hannah said. Still flat. Still calm. The patient was deteriorating. And that's precisely the problem, Mercer interrupted. He held up the documents like evidence. Like confession. This is exactly what I've been reporting. This pattern of dangerous independent action. Taking it upon herself to perform interventions that are far beyond her scope. This nurse has a documented history of falsifying patient records, stealing medications, and now performing invasive procedures without authorization. The security officer stepped forward. Hannah recognized the movement. She'd seen men move like this in Kandahar, in camps where authority wore a uniform and didn't ask questions. The guard was young, maybe 24, with the posture of someone who'd been told there was a dangerous situation and believed it without examining the facts. You need to come with us to HR, Paulson said. There was sympathy in her voice, which meant she'd already made a decision before walking into this room. Pending a formal investigation into your conduct. Hannah nodded once. She dried her hands on a towel that smelled like bleach and industrial soap. The paramedic she'd saved was alive because of her. The contractor in room 312, the one she was here to watch, the one still uploading intelligence to a CIA server, was alive because of her presence. And in exactly 14 minutes, she would be escorted out of Seattle General, suspended pending review, barred from patient care, trapped between the truth and an operation that classified her real mission as something that officially didn't exist. Mercer filed the complaint with the state nursing board while she was still in the elevator. She didn't see it happen, but she knew it did because that's how systems worked. That's how men like him had learned to operate, documentation first, questions never. By the time she reached the ground floor, the state board would have received a formal allegation. By the time she reached her locker, her license would be flagged. By the time she reached the parking lot, she would be radioactive to every hospital system in Colorado. She changed in the locker room in complete silence. The folded flag was still there, tucked behind her backup uniform, the white linen wrinkled but intact. The flag had come home from Bagram in a box. The soldier it had draped hadn't. Hannah touched the fabric once, then closed the locker door. The rain started as she walked to her car. Not gentle rain, but the kind that hammered the parking lot like judgment, running in rivers down the windshield and pooling in the asphalt. She sat in the driver's seat with the door still open, the cold air hitting her face, and thought about the paratrooper in room 8, breathing now because she'd moved faster than hesitation. She thought about the contractor in room 312, still alive because she was watching. She thought about the mission, Operation Silent, though the code name had been classified before it left the Pentagon briefing room, and how she couldn't explain any of it without destroying the entire operation. She couldn't tell them she'd been trained by JSOC. She couldn't tell them about the 3 years she'd spent at Fort Bragg learning to keep people alive in the absolute worst possible circumstances. She couldn't tell them that the falsified records Mercer had documented were actually encrypted communications with her handler, buried in patient charts using a system that wouldn't be declassified for another decade. She couldn't tell them that the medication he claimed she'd stolen had been transported to an asset in witness protection who was still providing intelligence from inside a cartel's money laundering operation. Compartmentalization meant silence. It meant accepting humiliation. It meant standing in a break room while the staff rose and left, choosing not to sit near someone they'd been told was a thief and a liar and a danger. It meant looking at the paratrooper's eyes this morning and seeing no recognition, because his memory had been destroyed by the same IED that had killed 3 members of their original team. It meant carrying secrets so deep that vindication was impossible, truth was a luxury she couldn't afford, and honor was something that existed only in the private dark places where no one was watching. She couldn't defend herself. Defending herself meant exposure. Exposure meant the operation collapsed. Collapse meant the asset died. The asset was her responsibility. That's what the oath meant. That's what the pin from the aircraft wreckage meant, the one in her safe deposit box. That's what the folded flag meant, now sitting in a box in her car with the rest of her life, the rest of her identity, the rest of the person she'd been before Captain Hannah Clarke became just another nurse in just another hospital in just another city. The rain kept falling. She didn't start the engine. Not yet. That evening, Hannah stands at a rain-soaked bus stop on Capitol Hill, cardboard box balanced against her hip like a child. Inside, a cracked coffee mug with a faded army insignia, a dying succulent that never stood a chance in her locker, 3 protein bars she never ate, and at the bottom, wrapped in plastic, the folded flag from Bagram. The flag sits on top of the photograph, her team before the IED, 5 faces smiling at a camera in a dusty compound that doesn't exist anymore on any official map. Her reflection ripples in the puddles at her feet, ghostly and thin, as headlights sweep past without slowing. A bus rumbles by, spraying water across the curb. She doesn't step back. The cold soaks through her jacket. 2 hours ago, her JSOC handler called on a line that doesn't officially exist. The logistics contractor in the cardiac unit had fled Denver that morning. The intelligence network collapsed. The 6-month operation classified beyond her ability to explain or defend. Burned. The word kept repeating. Your cover is burned. The operation is compromised. You're done here. She'd walked out of Seattle General with security escort, her badge deactivated, her access terminated, her reputation in tatters, and no way to tell anyone why. The rain hammers harder. 3 days later, they allow her in to collect her final paycheck. A security guard escorts her through the employee entrance, not the main lobby, never the main lobby. She carries the cardboard box still, not because she needs anything else, but because leaving it in her apartment felt like surrender. The ICU hallway stretches familiar and foreign at once. Room 8 is 3 doors down on the left. She keeps her eyes forward. Her last walk through these corridors as anything other than a stranger. The guard checks his radio. Clears her for administrative only. She doesn't deviate. Doesn't look left or right. Just moves through the space she inhabited for 6 months like a ghost passing through walls that can't hold her anymore. That's when the hand shoots out from room 8. Fingers grasping. Trembling. His voice is raw, throat still scarred from intubation, but the word comes clear enough to stop her dead. Valkyrie. Hannah freezes. The box shifts against her hip. The guard doesn't notice. Doesn't hear. She stands perfectly still, caught between protocols that no longer apply and memories that were supposed to stay buried. The paratrooper's eyes have cleared, really cleared, for the first time since she carried him into this hospital. Morphine fog lifted. Recognition flooding in like floodwater. You, he rasps. 3 miles. Through the village. I remember your voice. I remember you telling me to stay awake. His finger points to the forearm tattoo she's seen before but never acknowledged, Valkyrie in block letters. The Marine officer visiting the next bed, the one who'd been laughing about something on his phone, goes absolutely still. His thumbs move across the screen. Fast. Searching. The paratrooper reaches further out of the bed, for line stretching taut. You're Captain Clarke. A laugh cuts through the hallway. Brittle. Sharp. Dr. Mercer emerges from the nurse's station, chart in hand, expression twisted into something that might be a smile if smiles could have teeth like that. Stolen Valor, he says to the Marine officer, voice loud enough to carry. Classic fantasy. Morphine-induced delusion, perhaps. She's a fired nurse with delusions of military service. I'd report that tattoo artist to the licensing board. The chart he holds is her termination paperwork. He waves it like a flag. The elevator doors behind him whisper open. A 2-star general in dress uniform steps off the elevator. Not walking, emerging. His presence moves the air in the hallway like pressure changing before a storm. An aide in dress whites walks 3 steps behind him, carrying a wooden frame. Polished boots echo on the tile floor. 1 step. 2 steps. The hallway goes quiet the way hospital hallways do when rank enters the space. Dr. Mercer's expression shifts. Something in his jaw tightens. The general walks directly toward Hannah without pausing. His eyes take in the cardboard box, the damp jacket, the look in her face that says she's already mourned her own disappearance. He comes to a stop exactly 3 feet from her. Then he renders a crisp salute, not to her, but to the frame his aide extends. Purple Heart. Bronze Star with Valor device. Combat Medical Badge with 3 stars. Silver Star. Each decoration catches the fluorescent lights. Gleams like a judgment. Captain Hannah Clarke, the general says, voice carrying down the hallway in a way that makes nurses pause in doorways, makes a resident step back from a computer screen. United States Army Special Forces. 7th Special Forces Group, Combat Applications Group. A colonel steps off the elevator behind him. Then a Navy commander in dress whites. Then another officer Hannah doesn't recognize but whose presence carries the weight of significance. The paratrooper tries to sit up, wincing, hand reaching toward Hannah. She saved my life. In Sanjan Valley. She saved my life twice. The Marine officer's phone is already recording. His jaw hangs open slightly. The Navy commander reads from a tablet in a voice meant to be heard, 2 bronze stars, 1 with Valor device. Purple Heart awarded for wounds sustained in combat operations. Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry in action. Combat Medical Badge with 3 stars for medical care under fire. Hannah doesn't move. Still holding the cardboard box. Still holding the folded flag and the photograph and the proof that she was someone before she became no one. The general's voice drops lower, meant only for her. The Pentagon sends their regards, Captain. Your work on Operation Silent, 2 FBI agents in dark suits move past him with the fluid precision of apex predators. They flank Dr. Mercer. His face drains white like someone pulling a plug. Dr. Richard Mercer, the first agent says, voice clipped and official. You're under arrest for obstruction of a federal military investigation, falsification of medical records, and filing fraudulent complaints with state regulatory bodies designed to interfere with an active JSOC operation. Handcuffs emerge. Silver and cold. What? No, she's just at Mercer's voice climbs. The second agent snaps the cuffs on with one practice motion. Our investigation into forged patient documentation spans 6 months. You fabricated evidence against a uniformed officer. You filed false complaints with the state nursing board. You documented protocol violations that never occurred. The first agent begins walking him toward the elevator. Mercer stumbles. His protest echoes off the walls. You can't, I'm a physician, I have credentials, nobody stops them. Nobody blocks their path. The gathered staff simply press back against the walls, shoulders against tile, eyes forward, creating a corridor through which a man with credentials walks toward handcuffs. Hannah watches without blinking. The folded flag sits against her hip. The photograph of her team, whole, smiling, alive, peeks from the top of the box. The general places a hand briefly on her shoulder. Not a casual touch. A benediction. Welcome home, Captain, he says quietly. Then he turns and walks back toward the elevator, his aide and his officers trailing behind him like ceremony itself has a wake. The paratrooper reaches out one more time as Hannah passes his room. She doesn't stop. She doesn't acknowledge. Operational security holds even here, even now. His fingers grasp at empty air. She walks toward the admin office to collect a paycheck she'll never cash. And the hallway goes quiet behind her except for the sound of rain hitting the windows and a Marine officer's phone still recording everything that mattered. The Marine officer's phone drops to his side. His face goes white. He steps into the hallway, and his voice comes out hollow, reading from the screen like he's translating something impossible. Captain Hannah Clarke. Silver Star recipient for actions under fire. Bagram Airfield. The words hang in the corridor like a grenade someone forgot to throw. He reads it twice. Then a third time, as if repetition might change the meaning, might make it something other than what it clearly is. Dr. Mercer appears in the doorway of room 312, and the sound of his laugh is brittle, sharp as breaking glass. "That's Rich," he says, stepping toward the Marine officer with his hands raised in mock surrender. "A stolen Valor fantasy. Some poor woman playing soldier on the internet." His voice carries that practiced condescension, the tone of a man who has never met a truth he couldn't dismiss with enough institutional authority behind him. "I've known Hannah Clarke for 6 months. She's a floor nurse. A competent one, I'll grant you, but nothing more. Whatever fabrication you're reading there," he gestures dismissively at the phone. "It's not her." But even as he speaks, his eyes betray him. They flick toward room 312, toward Hannah standing motionless in the doorway, still wearing the same rain-soaked scrubs from the parking lot. The color drains from his face in the moment before the elevator doors open. A 2-star general steps into the hallway in dress uniform, every brass button gleaming under the fluorescent lights like polished mirrors. His aide follows 3 steps behind, carrying a frame. The general's eyes find Hannah, and something shifts in the air, pressure change, like the moment before a storm breaks. His hand rises in a salute, crisp and precise, and the gesture carries the weight of ceremony, the kind of respect that comes from command, not request. The general's face is carved from weathered oak, and his eyes are the color of gunmetal. "Captain Clarke," he says, his voice like a tank idling in a garage, deep, controlled, capable of immense power at any moment. "Commander of JSOC Task Force Silent. 12 confirmed lives saved in Operation Silent Whisper. Including the man in that room." He nods toward the paratrooper's bed. "Sergeant Marcus Morrison. You carried him 3 miles under fire when his femur was shattered. You controlled the hemorrhage with a tourniquet improvised from your own field dressing while rounds impacted within meters of your position." The aide steps forward and turns the frame so everyone in the hallway can see it. Shadow box. Burgundy backing. Medals arranged in ascending order of prestige. Bronze Star. Silver Star. 2 purple hearts, their ribbons faded from deployment sun. And at the top, a Navy Cross, the 3rd highest decoration for valor in combat, the kind of medal that means you were standing in the place where death was most likely and you chose to save someone anyway. Dr. Mercer's mouth opens. Closes. The color in his face shifts from white to mottled red, and for the first time since Hannah arrived at Seattle General 6 months ago, she sees actual fear cross his features. The general continues, his voice steady and level. "You were operating under classified orders from JSOC, embedded in Seattle General to monitor a logistics contractor in the cardiac unit suspected of selling intelligence to foreign operatives. Your cover was operational security. When you performed the needle decompression on Sergeant Morrison, a procedure you executed flawlessly at the 2nd intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, you were making a tactical decision within your scope as combat medic, not civilian nurse." The hallway has gone silent. The kind of silence that has weight and substance, where you can hear the rain against the windows and the ventilators breathing their steady mechanical rhythm. Then the general gestures, and 2 FBI agents step around him, moving past like he's a gate opening. They're wearing dark suits and expressions that suggest they have had this conversation before and will have it again, and none of it will go well for the person they're approaching. Dr. Marcus Mercer, one of them says, pulling handcuffs from her belt in a smooth, practice motion. "You're under federal arrest for fabrication of evidence, obstruction of a military investigation, and filing false complaints using stolen credentials from the state nursing board. You have the right to remain silent." The words continue, mirandized and official, and Dr. Mercer stumbles backward, his hands raised in protest. "This is insane. This is a witch hunt. I was trying to protect patient safety." "No," the second agent says, and there's no malice in her voice, only efficiency. "You were trying to destroy the career of a federal operative to cover up the fact that a civilian nurse outperformed you in a medical crisis. You documented her procedure with yellow highlighting. You filed complaints under false pretenses. You knew who she was, and you attempted to obstruct our investigation." The handcuffs click. Once. Twice. They seat around his wrists with the finality of a door slamming shut on a life. They walk in past room 312, where Sergeant Morrison watches from his hospital bed, and where a family, the people who witnessed Hannah reduce a shoulder while Dr. Mercer screamed about scope of practice, stands in the doorway. The father steps into the hallway as Dr. Mercer passes. Doesn't say anything. Doesn't need to. His face says everything. They walk in past the break room where staff abandoned her 3 weeks ago, where a nurse who had looked Hannah in the eye that morning sits frozen mid-sip of coffee, the cup suspended in air. The room goes absolutely still. They walk in past the unit board where the yellow highlighted incident report still hangs, a monument to his fabrication, now irrelevant as ash. A resident who had volunteered to observe in the ICU that day, the one who had frozen when Hannah performed the needle decompression, is standing at the medication station with her phone out. She doesn't put it away when the agents pass. She keeps recording. The footage will be on social media within the hour. Within 24 hours, every hospital in the region will have seen Dr. Marcus Mercer in handcuffs, walking past the people he tried to destroy, heading toward federal prosecution. The elevator doors open. The agents flank him as he steps inside. His reflection in the polished doors shows a man whose face has aged 10 years in 10 minutes, whose hands are trembling inside steel cuffs, whose institutional power has evaporated like rain on hot asphalt. The doors close. He's gone. The general turns back to Hannah, and his expression softens by a degree, not kindness, exactly, but something close to it. The expression of one soldier acknowledging another who has done their duty under circumstances that would break most people. His aide hands the frame to another aide, who steps forward and carefully places it in Hannah's hands. The president would like a word, the general says. You saved 12 lives in Operation Silent, including carrying Sergeant Morrison 3 miles under fire with a femur fracture that should have left him immobile. You executed 3 emergency medical procedures in contested territory. You never broke composure. You never retreated. He pauses. Your presence is requested at the White House tomorrow at 1400 hours. The Commander-in-Chief wants to thank you personally. Hannah's hands tighten on the frame. Her composure, the thing she has maintained through 6 months of isolation, through public humiliation, through accusations of theft and falsification, through suspension and desperation, finally cracks. Not visibly. Not in the way civilians understand cracks. But her breathing changes. Her eyes widen by a ½ millimeter. The trembling that appears is not fear. It is restraint. It is the physical manifestation of a dam holding back an ocean. The general says gently. She forces the words out. Understood, sir. From room 312, the sound of a salute, the crisp movement of a hand rising to a hospital gown, for line swaying. Sergeant Morrison, who carried her call sign tattooed on his forearm all these months while not recognizing her face, has finally put the pieces together. His hand rises in perfect military posture despite the morphine, despite the hospital bed, despite the fact that his body is still learning how to heal. The Marine officer salutes. His hand moves to his forehead in the formal gesture of respect, and the movement carries the weight of ceremony. Then a nurse, one of the people who had abandoned Hannah at lunch 3 weeks ago, stands up from the medication station and salutes. Her hand trembles as it rises. A doctor appears from an examination room. Salutes. Another nurse. Another salute. Within seconds, the entire hallway has transformed into a formation. 20 people at attention. Staff members who had whispered about Hannah, who had crossed the break room when she entered, who had accepted Dr. Mercer's accusations as gospel, now standing rigid in military respect. Some of them have no military experience. Some of them probably don't fully understand what they're saluting. But they understand power. They understand that they were wrong. They understand that the quiet woman they had dismissed was something far greater than they had ever imagined. Hannah stands in her rain-soaked civilian scrubs, still holding the frame with her decorations, and brings her hand up in the salute she has executed 1,000 times. The movement is automatic, muscle memory from a decade of formations and inspections and combat operations. Her hand is steady. Her back is straight. Her face is composed. But her eyes are seeing Bagram again. Seeing her team whole and smiling. Seeing the flag folded in thirds and pressed into her hands. Seeing Sergeant Morrison's face when the IED went off, the way his leg separated from his body, the way she had knelt in his blood and applied the tourniquet and kept him breathing while rounds impacted the wall behind her head. The salute holds. 20 people in perfect silence. The only sound is rain against the windows and the ventilators breathing their mechanical rhythm and the distant ping of the elevator arriving on a lower floor. The general's aide steps forward and gently takes the frame from Hannah's hands. Sets it carefully into the care of another aide, who will ensure it reaches secure storage. The general nods to Hannah with the kind of respect that transcends rank, the respect of one operator acknowledging another. "Welcome home, Captain," he says quietly. The elevator doors open. The general steps inside. His aides follow. The doors close. The hallway begins to breathe again. People lower their hands. The formation dissolves into individual staff members who are suddenly very aware of the people standing next to them, of the magnitude of what they have just witnessed. A young doctor, the resident who had frozen during the needle decompression, approaches Hannah quietly. "I'm sorry," she says. "I didn't know." Hannah looks at her. Her voice, when she speaks, has dropped an octave. The voice of someone who has given orders while the world was ending around her. "You do now." She walks toward her locker. The cardboard box from 3 weeks ago is still in the administrative office, waiting for her to collect her final paycheck. But she doesn't need it anymore. Tomorrow at 1,400 hours, she will stand in the Oval Office in dress uniform while the President of the United States pins a Distinguished Service Cross to her chest. The photograph will go on the President's desk. The photograph will enter history. But tonight, in her apartment, she will finally take the folded flag from her locker and place it in a shadow box, burgundy backing, arranged with the care of ceremony. And she will set that shadow box on her shelf, and she will press her hand against the glass, and for the first time in 3 years, she will cry. Not because she has been vindicated. Not because her power is finally recognized. But because she can finally stop hiding it. If you've ever been the quiet person in the room that nobody understood, the one with hidden depths, the one carrying secrets that would change everything, then you know what Hannah felt in that moment. Like finally being seen. Like finally being home. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. Comment below, if the Pentagon called your workplace tonight, would you get on the helicopter? Because I'm betting more of you than admit it already know the answer.